Could the UK be heading for a clash with Donald Trump over tariffs? Keir Starmer's proposing to align with the EU on carbon levies. That could put tariffs on imports based on their emissions. It's being billed as part of a reset with Brussels, but potentially threatens to drag the UK into a standoff with the US. Geoff Hoon is a former Defence Secretary and Minister of State for Europe during the Tony Blair years. He joins us now. Geoff, good morning.
Good morning.
Keir Starmer's trying to do two things at once: resetting Britain's post-Brexit relationship with Brussels and also negotiate a deal with the White House to lower the 10% tariffs on British goods. Can he do both brilliantly?
I think he can, because what we know about President Trump is that he tries to do his very best in his own view as to what is right for the United States. And I think it's absolutely indispensable that the British Prime Minister does what he judges to be right for Britain and what is best for Britain.
So what do you think would be best for Britain, first up, in terms of that EU-UK trade reset?
I think there's no doubt that we need, in the interests of British business, to move much closer to the European Union. There are clearly red lines that we must not cross, and the Prime Minister had rightly set those out. But at the same time, we need to recognise that our 40% of our trade remains with other EU countries. We have to find ways in which we can work more closely together with our closest neighbours.
So talk to me about this carbon tax, because the concern is if we are united with the EU on this, it's going to make that secondary aim of negotiating a trade deal with the US more difficult. Why is that?
Well, the first thing to say about the carbon tax is that carbon does not respect national frontiers. So it is absolutely necessary, as we found with a whole series of international agreements, that we find ways multinationally of working together to protect our environment. And the carbon tax is part of a way of doing that. So far, from what I understand, it has been remarkably successful. So having that in place is not just about the UK, it is also about a wider approach to protecting our environment. And all countries need to participate in that, whether they're members of the European Union or not. What
about the US? You know, Donald Trump famous for saying, drill, baby, drill.
Well, the United States under Donald Trump has a particular view of these matters. In the past, the US has led the way under Vice President Gore, for example, in terms of environmental protection. We have to see how the US deals with these issues internationally. I recognize your skepticism, and I suppose I share it, because we've seen what a track record the president has on these matters. But at the same time, I would hope that the US would recognize that international agreements to protect the environment, all of our environments, are absolutely vital.
It's also going to have a big difference on our own sort of bank balances. Businesses have said that without an EU deal on this specific carbon levy, the UK could end up paying £800 million a year in green taxes to Brussels.
Well, again, that's an example of why it is that we have to make these pragmatic decisions. And I think the Prime Minister has been very cautious, and rightly so, in terms of realigning with Brussels and with the European Union. But at the same time, when we're looking to protect the interests of British business, and crucially, when we're looking to grow British business by growing the economy as a whole, this realignment is pragmatically common sense, frankly.
British businesses are riding the aftershocks of Donald Trump's Liberation Day and the trade war that he's sort of escalating with China. Right now, we are hearing, some media's reporting this morning, that a trade deal with the US could be signed in a matter of 3 weeks. You talked to me about hope earlier. Are you hopeful that could be done, a deal done in 3 weeks?
I would hope so, certainly, although in the end, it really depends on what that trade deal consists of. I'm strongly in favour of the idea of doing a deal with the United States. I think that would be good for the British business, particularly in the light of the tariffs that have been imposed on the car industry, steel, aluminium, and so on. So that has to be a good thing for Britain. On the other hand, the devil will always be in the detail. It depends what is in that agreement, what the United States are looking for. In the past, they've been looking for things like, being able to sell chlorinated chicken and hormone-injected beef that have not been acceptable even to the Conservative government. I doubt that they'd be acceptable to a Labour government, and therefore before I can really reach a judgment on your question, I think it's necessary to know what any agreement contains.
Yeah, well, actually, what was interesting, Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, has ruled out sort of any change on food standards at all. He said chlorinated chicken and hormone wash beef are red lines in negotiations. We have offered some sort of sweeteners. Keir Starmer's offered to cut Britain's 2% digital services tax and sort of water down some online safety laws to try and appease US tech companies. Do you think that's enough to sway Donald Trump to give us something more favourable?
Well, I certainly hope so. And Donald Trump has talked about a good relationship with the United Kingdom. And obviously, over the years, I benefited enormously from working closely with my actually Republican counterparts. So I think there is a way there of finding an agreement. But, and I apologise for repeating this point, it does depend on what it contains, obviously.
Yes. You've got some quite healthy experience of dealing with a controversial US president, George W. Bush, in your case. What advice would you give to someone trying to navigate slightly uncharted waters with Donald Trump?
A lot of play is made about putting America first, but my experience, even with Democratic presidents, is that has always been the case, that US presidents always put the interests of the United States first. Perhaps Donald Trump is doing it in a rather more strident way than many of his predecessors, but I think anyone dealing with US ministers or their equivalent has to recognize that is always the starting point. Whether they're Republicans or Democrats, it is the interests of the United States that come first. And in a negotiation, it's perfectly reasonable for British ministers, perfectly sensible and indeed necessary for them to say, well, what is in the best interest of Britain?
We've then also got the ambassador, Peter Mendelsohn, right in the crucible right now, desperately trying to secure some sort of exemption from medicines in terms of any sort of potential looming pharmaceutical tariff. How critical are ambassadors at moments like this?
I think they're absolutely crucial. And that is not to say either that we've not had some very distinguished, very expert ambassadors drawn from the civil service. But at this point in relationships, I think it is extremely helpful to have someone with Peter's very strong political background, both in Britain, but also, of course, as a trade commissioner in Brussels. So he's someone who knows the territory, who understands the give and take in these kinds of negotiations. And I'm sure he's doing a very good job.
Geoff, thank you so much. Geoff Hoon, the former Europe Minister and also former Defence Secretary. It's been fascinating to get your insight on exactly the two objectives the Prime Minister is trying to achieve at the same time: a trade deal with the US and also closer relations with the EU. How do you do one without jeopardising the other? Geoff, thank you. Callum, it was interesting. That was a very actually optimistic and quite practical look at what could be happening.
I think as well, the timing on this will be fascinating because there is reports in the Times today that US officials reckon there'll be a trade deal within the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, they've said it's possible. A senior White House source, a trade deal with the UK is possible in 3 weeks, and that the US is then, and this is what slightly maybe waters it down, says the US is keen to announce some deals very soon, but they didn't say with who. And of course it's possible. I think actually we'd be hoping it does happen.
And what influences that? So the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is meeting the US President later today. There are also representatives of the Trump administration in Paris for talks on Ukraine, among other things. Tariffs and trade likely to come up there as well. So there are lots of messages and lots of approaches and lots of meetings between administration officials from around the world, from different countries around the world. And so is there a consistent message from European leaders in light of all that's going on? Or actually has everybody kind of got a bit of self-interest at the heart of the conversations they're having with the Trump administration?